Hello, everybody. Welcome to Free Thinkers podcast number 37 of this series. And the theme today is humanity rising soul by soul and awakening to a greater destiny and purpose. And we're going to cover topics such as quantum consciousness and remembering our true selves, science and spirituality, and the realm of true exploration, and the shift from me to we, experience of oneness, transcendence, love, compassion, and connection to spirit. I'm delighted to have here today Pete West, who's a trailblazer in the field of human consciousness. He founded the Institute for Quantum Consciousness in 2013 to embrace the synchronicities between some core principles of quantum physics and expanded states of awareness. His book, Quantum Consciousness Journey Through Other Realms, documents the philosophies, methodologies, and case studies for the quantum consciousness experience. And the book remains pre-course reading for the university's Universal Consciousness courses. Pete was president of the Michael Newton Institute for Life Between Lives for 10 years and has trained many of the practitioners around the world. In 2013, he was awarded the Peggy Newton Award, highest accolade for outstanding service to the organisation. He continues to serve on the MNI Advisory Council. He is a contributing author to Memories of the Afterlife, The Little Book of LBL, and Wisdoms of Souls, and is a much sought after speaker in the field of consciousness beyond the body. His latest book, The Transcendence of Celeste Kelly, has blended much of his latest work into the story of a quantum physicist who discovers the realm of the metaphysical and sets out to change the world. He created the Here Comes the Light 2028 discussion groups and the Transcendence Adventure, a self-paced program using meditative practices and artwork by P11, designed to transcend mental health challenges. He balances his time between his own practice, leading the team that teaches the Institute's work, speaking engagements, and writes periodically for a number of publications. His first book, Hypoenergetics, The Four Dimensions, has reached audiences around the world. Pete's previous background was an executive in the Australian banking industry. He served for over 2 decades with one of Australia's leading banks before starting his own change management consultancy, focusing on values-driven organisational transformations across Australia, Asia, and the United Kingdom. As I said before, Pete speaks regularly at public gatherings in line with his purpose to help people to remember who we really are. Thank you, Pete. Thank you for agreeing to come to this podcast today.
Hi, Ameena. It's great to be here. And that's very much the long introduction. I think you've done some real research there.
Oh, well, I mean, I wanted to capture everything about your work and where you've come from. So, yes, sorry if I talk a lot at the beginning, but it's over to you now. So let's go straight in. Let's start with your own journey, Pete, in this lifetime incarnation. So you were an international banker. I'd like to know, what did you learn? What did you need to learn and evolve to bring into your present life as a quantum healer connector?
Well, it's a funny old thing, isn't it? Whether it's Pete Smith, the banker, or Pete Smith, the consciousness researcher. I mean, two very different lives. And I think for the first 20 odd years, having moved into banking circles, I think it was important for me to be part of a corporate machine and a corporate system to understand that is not what the world needs. And, I regard myself more as a reformed banker these days because, that was something that I needed to do for a period of time. I needed to understand what we needed to change. And I feel that's why I was in that environment for 20 years. But for me, my journey was about learning the corporate world. They were trying to put me through, MBAs and that sort of stuff. And I dropped out and studied hypnotherapy originally. And a few people told me I was quite crazy. And I'm happy to say if their view of normal is that, then I'm happy to be quite mad. But for me, it was about moving out of that corporate environment to understand that there was a whole different world. I think you need to understand what you're dissatisfied with, and that, if you like, activates a journey where you go looking for something.
Thank you for that. I mean, I haven't kind of prepared the next question, but I do want to ask it because
Hmm.
we started before we press record talking about the pandemic response, and I know you had it particularly hard in Australia. And my view is that many of the first countries, such as Australia, America, Canada, the UK, and New Zealand, had different forms of it being quite hard. My own kind of, and I say awakening process because it's more geopolitical rather than spiritual here, was the extent that the banks controlled things in terms of the politics and the geopolitics and things like that. So I guess I'm just wondering, and this is just wondering because you're on, I have you in the room. Was that part of realizing that there were some machinations in the background, or was that not part of your kind of own journey?
I guess I started to see through the system and having an idealistic mindset and wanting to make the world a better place. I realized I'd never be able to do it as a banker. And I remember, we had the boom times of the 80s and the fallout in the 90s. And I remember sitting down with and making 40 people redundant in one day. And I sat down with a piece of paper at the end of the day and I realized that that would pay the CEO's salary for a month to end 40 people's careers. And that was when I realized that there was something that needed to be done here. Rather than go into the intricacies of a banking system that doesn't really have any money, and they just create debt on paper for people. But we'll leave that for another day, perhaps. What it did was it helped me to understand a change in vibration was required for the whole of society, and the banking industry was never going to do it. So it, if you like, catapulted me on a journey of consciousness that allowed me to start to explore things. And you start to explore for yourself. I was a stressed person and I went to a hypnotherapist and they helped me feel better. And then I looked at past life. Then I looked at quantum physics. Then I tried to blend spirituality in with it. So it's like any of these journeys, Ameena, isn't it? You sort of just follow the trail of breadcrumbs and it takes you somewhere that you end up in a place where you never thought you'd be. And that's what I love about the possibilities when you see the potential in what's unfolding around you and you chase the energy that's leading you and it takes you into amazing places.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I was listening to somebody yesterday, and on a podcast, and they were talking about, and again, I haven't prepared this as background discussion, but they were talking about the kind of difference between being overemphasized on the spiritual at the expense of the material, and then being overemphasized on the material at the expense of the spiritual. And I guess the whole banking, corporate, commercial, consumer world is the latter. And the real aim of spiritual adeptness is to find the balance exemplified by Archangel Michael, which is the fusion of both the spirit and matter. So so it's really important, isn't it, to have our material experience in order to find that spiritual path or spiritual journey and not deny that. Pete, a seminal moment for you was discovering the work of Michael Newton and his Institute for Life Between Lives hypnotherapy. Do you want to talk more to that?
Mm. Well, as a budding young hypnotherapist over 20 years ago, I was drawn a lot. I originally got into that industry because I was fascinated by past life work, having done some of my own sessions as a client. And I went looking for a book in a bookshop and for my teacher as an act of gratitude. And I stood in front of the bookshelf and shut my eyes and said, take me to the book I need today. And I pulled Journey of Souls by Michael Newton off the shelf. What I forgot to do was say, take me to the book for him. So I pulled one off the shelf for me and I read the back of that book and something inside me shifted. And within 6 or 8 months, I was on a plane to America to learn that work. For me, the discovery of his work, which just so people know exactly what I'm talking about here, this is where you go between incarnations, outside of time and space, into the spiritual dimension where our soul lives. We go into that place where we both plan and debrief each of our lives. We can look at the sweeping view across the lineage of our soul, connect with the spirits of our friends and family on the other side, who are like soul family, more than biological family. And it's a phenomenal spiritual realm that Michael Newton mapped across 7,000 cases over 30 years. So for me, discovering that just opened so much for me. And I arrived at a time that the organisation was having some change. I stepped up to help him, ended up working closely with him for a long period of time. And, that work is now in 40 countries and 20 languages. So we continue to take those sessions to the public to help them understand themselves from the view of their own soul.
Oh, it's really interesting. There's a couple of things that I want to explore with you. One is about the power
Mm.
intent, because you said, take me to the book. So there
Mm.
was an element of intent in that. And you do talk about at the Institute for Quantum Consciousness experimenting with facilitating journeys outside of time and space.
Yeah.
So where does intent play into that?
The way I describe this to the facilitators that we train is I believe that your intent is the rocket fuel for the journey. If you want to take somebody out of their body and into the quantum field to retrieve incredible information that makes a real difference in their life, then you actually dial up the quantum field through that intention. So when we create that in collaboration with our clients, that becomes something very powerful, high vibrational, and, as I said, the rocket fuel for the journey. So for me, it's everything, Ameena.
Yes, I mean, so, something that I would probably think that a lot of people struggle with is formulating intent,
Mm.
because we live in such fear-based societies, don't we? I mean, we've been conditioned
Mm.
into fear-based, realities.
We
And
have.
so I guess in a sense, really understanding one's power can be quite frightening. And I think there is a famous quote, which is, it's not our smallness that is the most fearful, but our greatness, which is the most fearful. So I guess that's tied up with intent. But just moving on about, because I do talk to people on my podcast, and I think I expressed this before about moving much more into consciousness based inquiry and away from, look, this is going on in the world, look at all these rabbit holes, and being sharing that on the internet. So just going back to these case studies, you talked about Michael Newton having 7,000 cases on record. Um, People who have moved to travel to alternate realities may have talking about parallel lives or
Mm.
interdimensional consciousness as
Mm.
life forms in other dimensions or in physical planets elsewhere. Can you share any of the most interesting stories captured and why?
Mm. Absolutely. Let me say that the interdimensional and alternate reality work is more the Institute for Quantum Consciousness rather than Michael's original Life Between Lives work. So when we started to blend aspects of quantum physics with consciousness, we took four components out of quantum physics. We took the observer effect, non-locality, entanglement, and a holographic universe. So we took those four and we added consciousness to them, which gave us the creative effect, which gave us every awareness that we are everywhere. It gave us entanglement, that we could go within and we could find any other aspect of ourselves across any dimension where our soul resided. And we looked at holographic healing rather than do us a healing in one reality or one other lifetime. I mean, why not spread it across the lineage of your soul or across all dimensions in which you reside? So by adding quantum physics, the science of possibility, with consciousness, which is the fabric of the universe itself, that's where we came through with quantum consciousness. So we started to explore some of these other realities. And a couple of examples that, I mean, people need the stories and they need the examples to make sense of it. And of course, starting this work off, I was one of the original crash test dummies. And I always wanted to know what had happened if I'd stayed in corporate life. So I took a journey. It was facilitated for me as the client. And I observed another version of me who had stayed in corporate life. Now, strangely, we're very heavily quantumly entangled with these other versions of ourselves. So they're easier to access than what some people have done in past life work before. So I was able to witness another version of me who was on a train on the way to work, had ignored all of the yearnings of his soul to move into a more spiritual path and a more path that would bring exploration of consciousness and the sharing of that with the world. And I saw him on a train on the way to the city collapse with a brain aneurysm. He had a heart problem. He'd been ignoring all of the signs that he was being drawn in another direction. And I saw them start to try to revive him on the train, some of the other passengers, but he passed that day. And that was quite shocking for me. That was quite frightening. As I continued to explore that reality, because this is all outside of time and space as we know it. You know, I saw the effect on my family at the funeral. I watched my kids, all that sort of stuff. And it was an incredible wake-up call and a validation, if you like, that I had made the right decision. So these are the other paths that we explore with people to understand whether they have, you know, what would have happened if. And we don't enter into it for validation. We enter into it to raise the vibration of both versions of ourselves by hosting conversations where these two versions help each other. So that was the ultimate experience, really, because he passed. But often we will have conversations between the one of us that went in the other direction, and they share intel. You know, what did you learn? What did I learn? What can I offer you in terms of vibration and frequency that helps you in your reality? So by living more multidimensionally, we are able to explore the learnings of the path not taken.
It's really interesting. I mean, there's so much coming into human kind of language now, and I think I've heard you say that some of these terms were like, not expressed as frequently as they are now. Timelines is one, and so you saw a timeline of self
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
was a potential. And people talk about potential timelines and collapsing timelines and stuff. So I just want to ask you about that more. What's your understanding um, of that? And that's number one. And number two, how accurate are people perceiving this, or is it just becoming like a jargon?
You know, the everyone talks about the timeline, clean up my timeline, or jump timelines, that sort of stuff. And if you look at multiverse theory, the way that it branches out through the universe, it's more like the branches of a tree that get increasingly smaller. There's twigs like in Y shapes that go in two directions all the way through. So the further you get away from the main trunk, the more intricate those pathways become. We are all of those pathways. The challenge for us is to know that we're in one of those pathways, even though we may drift back and forth between some of these different twigs, depending on where our consciousness is at. But for us to explore the ones that we don't know about is what really brings us a level of wisdom that we wouldn't have otherwise. My take is that multidimensional existence is who we truly are. We've just never been told. This is a human disguise, and the choice of free will that permeates the universe as the main rule in the universe is that we have free will. We can explore anything we want to. We just need to understand that it's there first and foremost, and then go looking for it. What would have happened if? What can I do in the future? In fact, we've started to mine the multiverse in the future. And so I'll come back around to the timeline thing. We do a journey called ultimate consciousness. And let's just say, for example, we want to dial up the version of me that has done this and done this, carries this vibration, has this level of happiness, because in the multiverse, all of this exists already. So if we expand a client's consciousness outside of time and space, and we ask for that version of us to come forward from the future state, then we can have a conversation with them. And it could involve things like, how did you do it? What would you advise me to do? And we can blend consciousness with that person so that we share that vibrational frequency, making that ultimate consciousness not just one of the options of the future, but potentially a self-fulfilling prophecy, so that all of the decisions that we make gravitate us towards that destination point back in linear time from that moment onwards. Now, this all happens in an expanded state where we meet that other version of ourselves that we normally present in a way that allows them to exhibit the vibration that they're in. Sometimes they'll look relaxed, sometimes they'll look wise, sometimes they'll look older than us, what we are now, and that's okay too, because we do have to echo linear time into these journeys. So our role is to facilitate those conversations and make that future state inevitable.
That's really interesting. I mean, this notion of free will, it's not a notion, it's a universal law, I know, of free will. Again, I was listening to somebody who was talking about the practice of being an initiate. And one of the metaphysical principles is that when we go on that journey into the afterlife, it's important to look at the light, because there's all sorts of spiritual beings that can entice us. And I'll touch on that in a moment. And one of the things that I've heard in the Truther movement is, and it's out there on the internet, is in order to stop karma, don't look into the light because that's just a trick. Look into the dark. And I was thinking, wow, if that's a trickery of free will, and you'd say that that's the kind of dark forces at play to entice human souls to go into the dark. Um, there's a lot to be aware of, isn't there, in terms of once you take yourself into the non-local, you are really slightly at the mercy of a lot of other soul forms out there that can interact with you, move through you, and interact.
I think the whole cut and thrust of light versus dark is an interesting story. My experience of it is that everything has balance, and that if you didn't have the shadows, you wouldn't know the sunlight. And I guess that there is an interesting way in which to negotiate that. So when we do our high vibration intention, that becomes, as I mentioned before, the rocket fuel. That carries the vibrational frequencies of what our experience will be as we travel. And if we get that right, and that's how we train our facilitators, to get that right, then that powers the journey all the way through. As a result, we don't necessarily come across any of the pitfalls or difficulties that people find on some other types of journeys. My experience is that we get from the universe what we ask for. There's a really interesting show that's just finished, episode 9 on Apple TV, and sometimes they get it right. It's a show called Dark Matter, not to be confused with a sci-fi one of some years ago, but it's an interesting fictional show about the multiverse and how this fellow goes into a box and he's in superposition, and he has a corridor full of doors, and the world that he enters directly echoes the frame of mind he had when he goes to open the door. He says, I'm going to find another difficult world, and he does. I'm going to find a world that is higher in vibration, and he does. I'm going to find my way home, and he does. So it's interesting how sometimes some of the shows that we see echo something of truth. My take is that if we keep our vibration high and we choose that as the journey we want to take, a lot of that takes care of itself.
Well, I agree with you, because we're talking about resonant frequency here, aren't we? And
Absolutely.
one of the things is that it's like how much we have potentially been controlled on the planet, or potentially, but realistically been controlled. So I guess in a sense, I always use the analogy of like, and I'm not a coffee drinker, but percolated coffee as opposed to like instant coffee. And we live in a society of instant gratification, of instant, can you tell me this in a soundbite kind of reality. But what we're talking about is on the path of the initiate in consciousness expansion, that there is a journey to go on. And in order to clean up your act and to clean your etheric field, or your consciousness is really important, because, as you say, we kind of can karmically attract what we're resonating with. And I want to show you this book quickly. Sorry for leaving out of the frame. Um, Imagine Heaven, which is a book which documents lots of near-death experiences. And interestingly, in there were people who did not have the light-based experience. They went into an underworld and met all sorts of hungry spirits that were like really destructive and devouring. And they needed to take that shift from an atheistic, non-spiritual viewpoint to actually asking for help from the higher guides, and that lifted them out of that awful world. So that was interesting to read that, and see people's experiences. So that kind of leads us into the creator, not the observer effect, which is one of the four aspects of interdimensional realities you were talking about earlier. So can you say to the viewer and listener, what's the difference?
Quantum physics discovered the observer effect 100 years ago now, when I'm sure most people have heard of the double slit experiment. Is it a particle? Is it a wave? Did it go through one slit or two slits? Fired a stream of subatomic particles. And what they found was that when the person conducting the experiment was looking for a particular outcome, which seemed to unfold, and they felt that it's the observer actually intrudes on the experiment itself and affects the outcome. Now, that's only the tip of the iceberg as far as I'm concerned, because that proves that we are actually the creators of our own reality. And if we can manipulate subatomic particles through our thoughts, then what are we creating every day in terms of the environments around us? Back in corporate days, they would talk about goal setting and targets and all of that. And, if you set the goal, you achieve it. Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. It's one of his 7 habits of highly effective people. There's something about what we create, we end up manifesting. And that's why we don't necessarily realize how powerful our thoughts are. So for me, the creator effect is us taking control of our own destiny and realizing that we are creating the vibrational environments around us, whether it's for our personal health, whether it's for our relationships, whether it's for the things that we want to bring into our lives. Of course, our soul's in collaboration with all of this, Ameena, as well. And so it has to fit a little bit with the purpose for this lifetime. But the creator effect for me is who we truly are. We are the creators of our own reality.
Well, again, interestingly, Pete, because when people have kind of hard lives and suffering lives, it's finding the balance between what is it that's like self-destructive patterns that are perpetuating, and then perhaps what is it that the tests that the soul give in order to transcend and to grow and evolve. Have you any thoughts about that, how to discern one from the other?
Well, I feel that as a baseline, courageous souls choose difficult lives. They want to accelerate their learning. We know from Michael's research, I mentioned the 7,000 cases, but I'll also offer that now there's 200 of us worldwide. We've reproduced that body of work tenfold. So we're up to something like 70,000 cases done in 20 different languages in 40 countries. So this is a huge body of work that involves things like life selection, which is the body that I choose, that I come here to be. So there's a couple of themes that are emerging in that work, but first of all, I really want to say to people that your soul chose you ahead of 8 billion others on this planet. Now, I believe that's the greatest act of unconditional love that we will ever experience. That's how much our soul loves us, chose to be us in this beautiful symbiotic relationship of an eternal being in a human disguise. And it's not one and one, it's sort of one package where the soul is with you and part of you and seeps through the human personality, and you're never really alone. So let me say that to start with. But let me say as well that we sometimes set up difficult lives. We're born into a certain culture, we'll have certain family relationships, we'll have certain events happen in our lives, and there'll be certain contracts that will happen, that will unfold under our free will. And how we react to all of that is the journey through life, because we overlay free will into all of that infrastructure that goes across that. Now, when we get back to the afterlife, when we finish this incarnation in linear time, we don't debrief how we set the life up. We debrief the free will that we exercise through that life, and the challenges that we responded to, the love and compassion that we showed to others. What did we choose? We debrief our choices. Now, a lot of people will bring difficult lives together, and one of the trends that we're seeing in our work, and this is across the quantum work as well as the life between lives work, some people are choosing difficult childhoods, for example, for a particular reason. One of those is they're incarnating into family lines to stop intergenerational trauma. Okay, so it no longer seeps into the collective consciousness of humanity because we're cleaning that up. So a lot of light worker type people are incarnating into family lines that are difficult, and they become the black sheep of that family. But they are there to stop the rot. So they're a circuit breaker, if you like. So we're seeing that, but I'm also seeing a lot of clients who are having a theme in this life that is an echo back into the lineage of their soul. And as we explore that, we're discovering that this might have happened in 20 other lifetimes. By knowing that, and by working in between the incarnations, the quantum field outside of time and space, we can clear all 20 at once. And that accelerates a further cleanup of the collective consciousness as we move further towards a humanity that's being set free from their past and the evolution of consciousness on this planet. So people are having difficult lives. It could be any one of a number of those things that are hitting them.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, Pete. I guess just bringing it to the everyday for the listener, many people see themselves as failing and getting caught up in the ego of their life purpose, or should I be doing this, or I'm not achieving, and very self-critical. Can you talk about that in relation to what happens to the heart when the head gets in the way like that?
Well, first of all, let me say to any of those people who are worried about failing, just incarnating on this planet is an act of courage. And Michael Newton's work echoed this. We've had it validated all around the world. This is a really tough place to incarnate because the vibrational frequencies are really heavy, because humanity's in a huge transformation at the moment. So only courageous souls are coming here in the first place. So that's the first thing I'd say to these people. Second thing I'd say is that you affect humanity just by being here. Okay, sometimes incarnating into a difficult place is enough. So, the human ego may see failure in comparison to societal standards that are out of kilter anyway. Like if you don't own 3 houses and 2 cars, you're no good. For me, that's more about materialism than it is about the development of the soul. And there's a lot of, you see the people who are, the more enlightened they are, the more they surrender some of the ideas of modern society, and they give stuff away or transcend the need for it. We all need a roof over our heads, but materialism has influenced our society where we need to be, you look at you mentioned before, the instant gratification of the modern age. And if you look at social media and the benchmarks that they set, this is how you should look, and this is how you should behave, and so much followers you should have. All of that is simply a fabric of a reality that is fast fading and about to collapse, so that we can get back to our true nature. You mentioned the head versus the heart. The head seeks to know what the heart already has. And I remember that when one of my kids turned 21 and I wanted to write something meaningful in a card for her, and I wanted to get this head versus heart thing right, I said to her, there's times in life when you've got to make a decision, and it's great when your head and your heart are in unison, and that's an easy decision to make, but sometimes they're not. And I said, when that happens, follow the heart, because the heart holds courage, but the head holds fear. So, the fear, the ego-based stuff is usually part of our mind traps that are built from societal standards, that are built from our conditioning in a society that has pretty much lost its way at this point. We're desensitized to the troubles of the world. We're propagated by media channels that really hide the truth from us. Social media has algorithms that try to affect the way that we think. For me, it's if all of that falls away, if we just drop into our heart, into that resonance state that you mentioned before, Ameena, when we're in resonance, we're in our highest possible vibration. If something doesn't resonate, then you drop away from it. You turn that show off. I've watched the news for many years because the news is completely out of resonance with the world. But to explore through the heart, to look at ways in which your soul wants to lead you towards your own development. The heart is the gateway to the soul. The mind is the gateway to the ego. And you bargain between the two, but it's great when the heart wins.
At this point, I want to just read a quote that I read of yours. We are at a remarkable crossroads of consciousness. We have a choice to return to the old way of being and take this glorious planet in an irretrievable direction, or we can center ourselves in our heart space and move through a period of change into a liberation of our species. So, in order to change everything on this planet, we simply need to pause and accept this. It offers the existential flip of perspective. Rather than be a human being having a spiritual experience now and then, we are multidimensional souls here to make a difference to the fabric of reality itself. I don't know if you remember writing that, but I found that in my research on you, and I thought
Sounds a bit
that's
like
really,
me.
yes.
I don't know where it is, but it does sound like something I'd say.
Definitely. So I wanted to bring that through. Do you think this is a time of the thinning of the veils, understanding afterlives, multiverses, jumping timelines, or multidimensionality, everything speeding up, evolving, a time of great awakening? Is that your view?
A big yes to all of that. And there's so many. I look at the podcast that you're doing, Ameena, and all of the people who are jumping on your show and having their say. And talked about this before we started recording, about you being an amplifier for the messages that we send, and for that we're grateful. But for me, there's so many more podcasts out. I look at some of the things as there's podcasts that are happening more and more about consciousness, and you're a great example of that. I remember 25 years ago, I learned this thing called Reiki. No one had even heard about it, but now everyone knows what Reiki is. When popular culture starts to pick up multiverse type theory, like the show I mentioned before on Apple TV, you've got even Sliding Doors, that was shot 30 years ago with Gwyneth Paltrow. I mean, that was the first sort of dual reality show, and they follow the two storylines in true multiverse fashion. And there's been countless time travel type movies and all of that ever since. It's all starting to seep into popular culture. When it's there, then you know that something is fueling it. And I feel that you talk about the thinning of the veil, absolutely. People are having more and more experiences, more UFO sightings, more kids are having past life memories. everything is speeding up. Our consciousness is, it's not just evolving, it's starting to explode into a new level of being. And, if the old ways were a car sitting on the edge of the cliff, people like you and me would be behind that car trying to push it off. So, bring on the new world.
You're very clear about that. I mean, you said it's a fast collapse in reality, this old breaking down of old paradigms and structures. And we are about helping humanity move beyond fear and dissolving limited beliefs, repetitive patterns of karma, for example, awakening to higher consciousness. I mean, I'm a believer of that, but I'm probably like you, one of the 5 or 15%. When I speak to people around me just in ordinary reality, then we're finding young people being socialized into mega cities, having everything to hand, being in open air prisons, hooked up to tech, having their values, politics, um, you know, tastes being shaped by, marketing. So how do we balance all of that? How do we say what's actually going to emerge in future timelines?
My take is that there are four systems on our planet that are in imminent collapse. And the first is our political systems. This bipartisan sort of one or the other, duality of this is the government and this is the opposition. If you just look at the language of that, it's all wrong. There's no oneness in politics. Humanity is screaming towards oneness at 100 miles an hour. So I think the old political systems are about to collapse. And if you look at the current debates happening in the USA, then there is so many people who are thinking, really, we need something else. And that voice is getting stronger. There's certainly people who are brainwashed into a particular political party. Well, we've always had those people back to the Middle Ages, but the political systems are no longer serving the planet and they will collapse. The second one is financial systems. At the moment, this whole thing about growth, economic growth, our financial systems are held together by sticky tape and rubber bands. We want young people to take out a mortgage of $1 million. Banks don't have the $1 million. So they create a debt for those people who take the $1 million mortgage. That gives them a debt they have to pay off for the rest of their lives. That gives the bank an asset, which is their house, and an income stream of a few $1 million until they actually pay that debt off. And then they'll charge them some bank fee on top of it. So that's a system, when it takes that sort of advantage of people, that will collapse. And of course, then they go out to market and they sell stocks and get even more capitalization. So that whole financial system, and it's all stuck together with international banking, that will collapse. The educational systems, I believe that they propagate this issue by building new cogs to fit into the old machine as the old cogs wear out. So our educational systems are carrying the same culture as well. But the one that's probably going to collapse fastest is the medical system. And I think the amount of trust that has been lost in pharmaceutical companies, in governments who endorse pharmaceutical companies, these four systems are all stuck together, and they're like four legs of a table, and the table is really starting to wobble. Only one leg needs to go, and the whole table will tip.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Pete, because I mean, kind of agree with you that all those systems, and then we didn't even cover the religious systems either.
Well, then I think
That's
they're gone
another.
already. Not to everybody, but I mean, they've
Yeah.
showed their limitations for some time now. Absolutely.
But I mean, the whole idea of pharma and the amount of people I say, well, the people producing vaccines are actually biodefense companies. They're not medical institutions. Um, and yet this cognitive dissonance, um, seems to still be there. So it's like, okay, but Yes, but we've got threat X. So threat X means that we all have to be locked down and contained and, injected and stuff. So I'd like to believe they're all in a state of collapse. How much of mind control's still playing out with the vast majority of the population?
Oh, there's we certainly haven't reached critical mass yet. The systems collapse when people walk away from them, and there are still a lot of people who are entrenched in the systems and actually beneficiaries of those systems. But all you need to do is the rot just needs to get into a couple of foundations of a house for the house to collapse. It doesn't have to be taken down from the top. Sometimes it's taken out from the side or out from the bottom. But I think we're reaching a point where, and you mentioned the fifth system religions, and I think a lot of, all the religions started off with pure intent. But I think when they became doctrine and were used for control, that was when they lost their way, or justification for religious wars, etc. I mean, that's when they lost their way, and that's been happening for centuries, really. But you're right, there are still people who are entrenched in the systems, and that's okay. But given that we can create our own reality, I choose in my own free will to know with all my heart that those systems are in imminent collapse. And that's the universe that I'm stepping into. If we all do that, then those systems will fade away even more quickly.
So, I know that I have asked, people who've come onto the podcast before about this concept of bifurcation. It will collapse for some, but not for others. I guess listening to you, are you saying it will collapse for all if the highest intent is the highest vibration?
Well, we can't completely rule out multiverse theory, can we? I mean, many different versions of our world that are, continuing to unfold with all the decisions that we make, collective decisions as well. Things like the Mandela effect, where some people remember one thing in history, other people remember another thing in history. For example, some remember Mandela dying in jail, others remember him being set free. So there are large chunks of consciousness that shifts between different realities. I believe if somebody wants to become part of a reality where we're free from some of the old impediments and the old systems that have held us back, I believe that's where they'll end up. Now, that's their individual and unique consciousness that may choose that. What's happening as the multiverse unfolds is a much bigger picture. So, I mean, I'm open to all of that. And I've heard that sort of stories of that fork in the road as well, where we have two Earths, and one in the old and one in the new. Yeah, that's okay. That's just multiverse theory 101. I just know which one I'll be in.
Well, I heard also recently that there's billions of humans on other star systems and other planets. And in fact, um, I forget, is he called Travis Walton? It's a guy who was abducted. It's a very, very famous contact experience in America and was abducted for a few days. And his testimony was there was a human on the craft, and he gravitated to the human, thinking, "Oh, there's a human here," but clearly it was a human, but not a human as a terrestrial human. So this idea, the multiverse and billions of humans on other planets, have you come across that concept? Yeah, is that part of your mapping out of the territory?
Anyone who's done any sort of past life or other life type work have always had off-world lives as part of people's soul lineage. I believe that there's other races in the universe. I believe that we've been in contact with many of them. I'm not a contactee expert, but I've heard enough through people saying the life they had as an Arcturian or a Pleiadian or however they are, and they can describe those cultures. That leads me to believe that they are, they are real experiences. And when you look at it, I mean, this whole solar system is like a grain of sand on a never-ending beach. The fact that we would be the only humanoid type race in an entire universe that is limitless is just ludicrous. I mean, of course, there is life on other planets. Eric von Daniken proved that with his ancient teaching and the ancient cultures of all of the stone carvings with helmet-type creatures who were there as part of the folklore of the locals. He also ran some mathematical probabilities about life on other planets, and virtually came up that it was a certainty. So, I mean, none of this is new. What we are seeing in the work that I do is that we are having a lot of people who are incarnating on this planet now who have a diverse lineage in their in the history of their soul, if we talk linear time for a moment, where they haven't been to Earth very much, but they've been to many other places. I've had people describe lives in other dimensions, on other planets, in other civilizations. All of us that do that work have been hearing this type of thing for years. And a lot of that can be non-human form too. I've had people describe what it's like to be part of a collective consciousness, where they are the courageous portion of that collective that have incarnated here into human form. I've had people tell me that they come from a world of energy, and they are like clouds of energy that move through their society of a higher vibration. I've had people describe what it's like to be translucent in their form. I've heard a lot about water worlds, where the whole planet is simply water. Water has its own consciousness, and we know that from Dr. Emoto's work back, 30 years ago in Japan. So, this is a huge universe. We're just one tiny little piece, and it's coming towards us at a rate of knots because people with those experiences are here now, taking human form in order to be part of the shift.
So that kind of leads us to this two worlds of science and spirituality. Do you believe that science can truly explore, given the limited constructs of scientific thinking today? And I'm saying that in relation to, I mean, we've got a cosmologist here in the UK, Brian Cox, and he did a whole series a few years ago on kind of the universe. And his parting shot at the end of it was, well, we haven't discovered other life, so we must be on our own. And I was thinking, if something could switch me off so much is the arrogance of that statement. And it's like, um, and then the cynic in me would be saying, of course, Brian Cox is being paid to say that. But this whole thinking of, unless we can quantify it and measure it, and it's a physical material reality, then we can't explain it, and therefore it doesn't exist. So, what are your views of that?
Well, it's like you go to, and I'm not the first to say this, but I love this story. You go to the beach, you take a kitchen glass with you, and you fill it up with water, and you hold it up, and you say, that's just water. There's no life in the ocean. But even within that glass, you can't see the plankton, and you can't see the microorganisms, and you probably can't see the human plastics that are there in micro form as well as part of the seawater. So that and the consciousness of the water itself. So we make an assumption that because we haven't seen it before, it doesn't exist. So for me, it depends on which type of science you're talking about, because we all know science has been compromised, and it's my science versus your science. And it always makes me laugh when somebody does the peer review process and they put a paper out there. They've done their experiments where they've intruded with their own observer effect, and they've known about this for 100 years. I did these experiments and proved my hypothesis. And someone will do a competing paper and they'll prove their own hypothesis that's completely different because they both use their observer effect. And then, of course, the peer review means that everybody gets a chance to debunk it. So in some ways, science has lost its way, apart from the research funding and towards an end and all of that. And I don't want to go near that. But for me, true science is about exploration. It's about what else is out there. It's about asking the right questions. It's about what have we not discovered. And that's what science should be saying, not that it doesn't exist because we haven't discovered it. It's just that we haven't discovered it yet, so let's keep looking. So for me, yeah, science needs to have that type of mindset to start the conversation.
So just in terms of conversation of exploration and inquiry, Talk us more through the quantum consciousness university that you set up.
Well, our institute, we took those four pieces of quantum physics that I talked about before, and we added consciousness to them. And somebody said to me, and this is my own observer effect, somebody said to me some years ago, how did you know that you'd be able to access other realities? And I thought about that for a moment. I gave an honest response. It never occurred to me that I couldn't. So therefore we did. And we've been accessing other versions of people, of the client, for over a decade now, and hosting those conversations for a swap of intel. We've been looking at interdimensional consciousness, where we take somebody out to ask an aspect of them to come forward that's in non-human form. We've been doing that for the same amount of time, over a decade. You know, for us, it's about we're using the quantum principles because, you know, if you look at string theory, there were 5 different versions of string theory until it was brought together as M theory back in the 90s. And that tells us that there's got to be about 12 different dimensions for the maths to work. Only one of those is time, the rest are space. So if you look at Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, you know, they know from that phenomenon that particles blink in and out of existence, and where do they go? So if you look at some of the leading theories in science, they're actually talking about other dimensions, multiverse theory. You know, when they looked at that back in 1957, when that was first, you know, discussed, they were talking about how the wave function doesn't collapse and it goes on and continues to form other realities. And the guy who wrote that was hardly a genius when he was a heretic when he launched his paper, but he was a genius at the end of the day. He died. So even quantum physicists are talking about these other realities, but they don't know how to scientifically access them because they're using the human intellect to try and find them. We're taking consciousness outside the body, and we're able to pierce that veil into these other vibrational frequencies to find the information that we seek.
So, what is the world in need of remembering right now in terms of the going out and bringing back from source the remembrance?
We just need to remember that this is not who we are. We need to remember that though we are magnificent beyond our knowing, that we are completely limitless and we are an eternal being having a human experience here for a short time, and that we have come here with a greater purpose in mind. We need to remember all of that, and we'll know that our education systems are wrong. We'll know that our conditioning is just an offer that we can refuse. We can know that we've set this world up as minimalist in terms of consciousness rather than embracing the true nature of who we really are. And once we remember our magnificence, this world will change overnight. We'll no longer be bound by fear because death is a misnomer anyway. So the greatest fear that we have is a misnomer. So that collapses all of the other levels of fear in between. And we're here for a short time to change this planet, turn things around, and make this the planet it always should have been.
Thank you, Pete. I mean, can you tell the viewers and listeners more about where they can find out about you and your work?
Well, our Institute for Quantum Consciousness is exactly that, .com, Institute for Quantum Consciousness.com. My own website is quantumconsciousness.com.au for Australia. Our work at the Newton Institute is newtoninstitute.org. And on my websites and on the Newton Institute website as well, there's lots of articles, there's interviews, there's a meditation system to help expand consciousness, lots of stuff there to explore that people can have a look at if they'd like to. And we have practitioners both for LBL and for quantum consciousness in different parts of the world. So if you want to partake of an experience, there's hopefully somebody close by.
And that's a big part of what you do, Pete, isn't it? Is to establish a global network of graduate facilitators, taking their services to the world to support and the continuing unfolding of bringing a raised,
Absolutely.
vibration to the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've a lot of our people went online as well. Back when the government restrictions were imposed on us, we had to make some decisions on whether we go online or we'd lose the work. So we chose to go online. So you can have access to a range of different people in different places that are in your time zone just by getting online. I've had a lot of face-to-face clinics over the years as well, Ameena, and I've found that, and I'll speak on behalf of all of our guys, that the online experience over Zoom gets us pretty much the same results as what we do face-to-face without the hassle of having to travel. So, well, physically anyway, certainly travel interdimensionally. But yeah, the Zoom is an option as well these days.
Yeah, I think it's Zoom's any form of internet transfer like this has been incredibly liberating or expanded the universe or expanded our world, I should say. I mean, prior to the pandemic, um, I wasn't related to people globally like I am now in all sorts of different groups. It's been very liberating when it's used positively
Couldn't agree
um,
more.
to us, yeah, to connect people all around the world. Is there anything we haven't covered that you would like to say in this podcast?
I want to reassure people who are listening that you are magnificent beyond your knowing. And when you're having a bad day, there's a little saying that helps me when I'm having a bad day, and I still have them, of course. But every moment of every day, your soul knows exactly what it's doing. And given that we are a wonderful combination of human and spirit as this one unique semblance that will never be seen ever again, it's reassuring to know that your soul is always with you, watching and helping and giving you ideas. So turn inside and listen, and you'll find the answers that you need.
That's really reassuring and beautiful, Pete. I think one of the things that, and I speak personally here, is to allow and to receive and to accept is so important, and to surrender. So this notion that we've got a whole, host of helpers around us. We've got a team, haven't we? A spiritual team around us who really want us to succeed, not in a way, but in a spiritual way, to become truly ourselves and to truly fulfill our purpose in this universe, on this planet, I should say. And that's part of it. It's also the soul contract with an individuated soul, but it's the collective as well, isn't it?
Oh, look, I'm really into this whole oneness thing, that there's a total lack of separation. I think separation is something that we experience in human form so that we can truly appreciate oneness. And I really feel that we are never alone. Anyone that feels lonely, I mean, there is, as you said, I mean, spiritual beings close by. There are connections with people that you've come across. And once you've been joined with somebody in any sort of conversation, you carry a part of that with you always. So, yeah, I mean, there's so much more to us than we know.
That's one of the things you talked about, quantum entanglement. And I guess the thing is, it's a re-education, isn't it? When you said, well, one of the things the educational systems is in free fall collapse. It's about re-educating what we're being entrained to say in our minds, the messages, the conditioning, and re-entraining that. I had a conversation with an employee recently, and they were experiencing a setback, and I was encouraging them to really love themselves, to
Mm.
not take this personally, the setback that they were experiencing, but to truly love themselves and to break that pattern in. And So, and I think that that's it, isn't it? It's to re-educate, some of the things that we say to ourselves, because we're actually diminishing our greatness, aren't we? When we're performing those negative kind of spells on ourselves, which is, I am no one, I'm not great, I'm a failure, I'm this, I'm that. So, okay, so Pete, it's been absolutely fascinating you coming on and talking to us, and I think we've kind of spanned the micro to the macro like quite effortlessly, and I'm sure that listeners and viewers will be really enlightened to hear about how we are so much more than we know, being limitless in our potential, of knowing the wisdom we uncover of our true selves. We didn't specifically talk too much about healing, but I know that your whole institute and work is focused on healing, so we can undertake and evolve waves of higher consciousness rippling out into the fabric of the cosmos to serve the universe itself, and that our personal universe is simply a holographic subset of all there is. So I think, Pete, I just really want to say thank you so much for coming on. And if people want to know more about your work, you talked about, is it www.quantumconsciousness.com.au,
That's right.
Australia? That's, yeah. So thank you so much. And to everybody who's tuned into this show, you'll find it on my Spotify platform, Ameena Ahmed Free Thinkers Hub. So thank you, Pete, again for coming on.
Thanks, Amanda. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure talking to you as well. Take care.
Thank you.